It's the middle of January, in the middle of winter, and it feels like spring outside. I went out and took the little dog out this morning, and the birds were singing, and the dog just looked around like, what is going on? But it is a beautiful day, and beautiful people in God's house. Amen? Yeah, good deal, good deal. I encourage you to be back this evening. The brother John Nichols will be with us. John always works real hard and brings us great lessons, and so we're always excited to hear his lessons. So come back this evening at our 6 o'clock service here. Brother John Nichols. Bob read from John chapter 1 this morning. And to sort of set the context that we've been studying from the Gospel of John, and his whole desire, his whole purpose, he tells us in the last chapter, he says, I write this in order that you might believe that Jesus Christ and the Son is the Son of God, and by believing Him you might have life. So it's a gospel belief. I mean, it's his mission. It's his directive. And he begins in chapter 1 and puts Jesus all the way back at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And he talked about how some people could see it and some people couldn't. Some people could see Jesus as a light of the world, and some people rejected Him. And so John chapter 7... is sort of where the text comes from this morning. I'm just going to read actually the first 9 verses. I think at first 8. I'll read the first 9 verses. After the things Jesus walked in Galilee, for He did not walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill Him. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. His brothers therefore said to Him, Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you're doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For even His brothers did not believe in Him. Then Jesus said to them, My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it, and its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not yet going up to the feast, for my time is not fully come. When He said these things to them, He remained in Galilee. Now, we have a sibling issue going on here, you know. And some of you have brothers and sisters, and really it's his brothers giving him a hard time. And they're saying, if you think you're so great and wonderful, you go to Judea, you go down to the south, and you show them how great and wonderful you are. And Jesus said, no, I'm not going down there because my time's not yet revealed, because He knew the Jews wanted to kill Him. Now that's going down toward Jerusalem. And He says, I'm staying in Galilee. And they said, well, if you're really so great that you think you are, you know, go show yourself openly, because no one keeps a good thing secret. And Jesus says, it's not my time yet, but your time already is here. He said, the world's not going to hate you, but they're going to hate me for what I'm going to tell the world. And then we have this statement that even His brothers did not believe in Him. Talk about rejection. When your own siblings don't believe in you. So I knew we were coming to chapter 7, and I'd been thinking, well, I'm going to take a departure from the book of John, you know, maybe for a Sunday or two, because we've been in it for a while. Because the Feast of Tabernacles is sort of a hard thing to sort of bring out. It was basically a time when they went out and built little booths, little stick huts, if you will, and they celebrate this feast out in the wilderness doing that. It's sort of an odd thing, and I didn't really sort of bring it out. But I was missing a verse in there, and that was the idea that His own brothers rejected Him. So you know the context we've been sort of doing. Jesus had fed 5,000 people. He delivered the apostles of raging storms. And now in verse 6, many people begin rejecting Jesus, and many of His disciples turned away. Then in verse 5, for even His brothers did not believe in Him. You know, Jesus experienced a lot of rejection in His life. What happened? A lot. In fact, he said in Luke chapter 17, he said he must suffer, referring to himself, many things and be rejected by this generation. In fact, Isaiah prophesied rejection. He was despised and rejected by man, of man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. It's almost as if Jesus was sent to the world to be rejected. Really, he was sent to save the world, but yet it's foresaid that the world's going to reject him because he's the light, the true light, and some people cannot comprehend it. Luke chapter 20, verse 17, Jesus said, referring again to himself, "What then is that is written? The stone which the builders reject has become the chief cornerstone." So this concept of rejection is something that we naturally want to avoid. We don't want to be rejected. We don't want to be denied. We go to great lengths not to be rejected. We dress certain ways, we act certain ways, we do certain things so people don't reject us. We express likes and dislikes about certain things just so people don't think we're crazy. Now, I'm not ashamed to say I like buttermilk. Okay? And some of you think I'm gross because of that. And I'm okay with that because you don't know what you're missing. Amen? Amen. But we tend not to do that. However, as followers of Jesus, we are to expect rejection. Isn't that the irony? That we are expect rejection. In fact, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, "Blessed are those who persecute you for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And then he goes on to say in verse 11 and 12, "Blessed are they when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And Jesus says, guess what? You're signing up for rejection. You're going to do something different that's going to be radical that people say, "I don't get that. I don't want any part of you. You're crazy." And Jesus says, guess what? I'm asking you to do that. Jesus tells his followers that being rejected is a blessing. Blessed are you when people reject you. And not only that, but to be happy about it. Say, what? What are you talking about, Jesus? To feel good about being rejected? Yes. Feel really good about it. So, basically, I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about the power of rejection. Now, and I said that in the Bible study class that sometimes as preachers you're always trying to think of how you're going to teach a lesson and how you're going to make it applicable and stuff. And I was sort of, like I said, sort of thinking about leaving John for a while, and then God gave me a slow, underhanded pitch this morning, to use a softball analogy or a baseball analogy. You know, just across the plate. Okay, now that will preach. And I said it out loud in the car or in the truck there, that will preach. It was when I heard about this man named Jason Comley. I hadn't heard of him at all. Didn't know who he was. Didn't know if it mattered. But maybe you heard of him. His name is Jason Comley. And let's tell you a little bit about Jason's story. He lives in New York, and his life was going pretty good. Things looked pretty good. He had a pretty good job. He worked in IT at a company, and a smart guy, and he was married, and they had a little place, and they were getting started out in life, and then his wife announced to him one day, "I'm divorcing you." And basically what Jason says is that she found someone taller, more handsome, and more wealthy than he was. And she left him. And he said, then I was devastated. He said, I just retreated from the world. He says, I lived in my little apartment, and I didn't interact with people. I just did my job and just went to my shell. And he said, and one night, he said, I just began crying. I just couldn't stop crying. He says, I was uncontrollably crying. He says, because I was so miserable. And he was sort of, incriminating himself, angering himself. And then he said, he asked himself, he says, what am I so afraid of? I'm just afraid of everything. I'm afraid of putting myself, I'm just afraid of everything. And finally he says, I'm afraid of rejection. That's what I'm really afraid of. That's why I'm not meeting new people. That's not what I've met a girl. That's what don't make any friends. He said, I'm just terrified of rejection. He figured his problem. He says, how am I going to fix myself of this fear of rejection? This doesn't mean anything probably to anybody but maybe some video gamers or people from the military. He thought of the Spetsnaz. Anyone heard of the Spetsnaz? I hadn't either, so don't feel, The Spetsnaz are an elite military group in Russia. They're sort of common, like our Navy SEALs. They're sort of super trained, commando type guys. And they do train women now too. But they're the elite. Just not anyone's a Spetsnaz. Only certain people make it to the Spetsnaz. So it's somewhat of an elite group. And he said, I thought of the Spetsnaz because he heard a very interesting thing on how they train the Spetsnaz to overcome their fear. Okay. And so one of the ways they train their Spetsnaz to overcome their fear is they lock them in a room with a mean dog. And the only thing they have to protect themselves is one of those little floating shovels. So they lock them by themselves in a room with a vicious dog, and they have one of those little floating shovels. And they have to protect themselves. And they have to overcome their fear. And he says, I've got to overcome my fear of rejection. I've got to get over this. I've got to get over this dread of people telling me no or, go away or rejecting me. So what he did, he made a game out of it. He made a game out of rejection. So the game has basically one rule. You must be rejected by another person at least once every single day of your life. Now, understand the rule. It doesn't say try to be rejected or hope to be rejected, but you must be rejected by another person every single day of your life. And he said what he discovered, much to his surprise, is that it was hard for people to reject him sometimes. People were actually pretty nice. So they were nice to him and said, yeah, I'll help you, or yeah, I'll do this. Then he had to go find someone else to reject him. Okay? So what he really did, psychology, we call this exposure therapy, facing your fear. That's what we call it. He just sort of came up with a way of calling it facing. So he called it's rejection therapy is what he called it. And so for $10 you can go online and order his set of cards. He's got 52 cards. And they're suggestions about ways of being rejected. So you wake up today, I got to be rejected by you. You just pull something from the deck and you go out and try this. Okay? And for example, he says, convince a stranger that you know him. Oh, I know you. And then they say, okay, yeah, I guess, yeah. Okay, you weren't rejected. They say, well, I don't know you from Adam. Okay, you were successful. Okay? Before purchasing something, ask for a discount. Try that next time you go to Walmart. You could do it today. Go to Walmart and say, well, those eggs says $1.69, but I think they're only worth $1.49. Could you give me a discount? And they say, oh, no, we can't do that. Okay, you're successful. You've been rejected. Okay? He makes other suggestions. Challenge a stranger to rock, paper, scissors. Hey, you want to play rock, paper, scissors? No, I don't want to play rock, paper, scissors with you. Okay? Sit by a stranger, strike up a conversation. Hey, beautiful weather we're having. Yeah. So his idea was that he had to change his reaction to failure. He had to change his reaction to rejection. Instead of being a bad thing, being a good thing. All right, you rejected me. I'm successful. Thank you. Thank you for rejecting me. He said on the radio, he said, just going up to someone and saying, hey, you got a piece of gum? Got a breath mint? I had onions for lunch. Just asking people simple things, not embarrassing things, not shaming things to them, but putting yourself out there in order to be rejected. Rejection therapy. He said it's changed his world. And not only has it changed his world, but he's got people around the world now following him because they've ordered the little cards and they're practicing it. He said one of the interesting things is this little late 80-year-old Russian grandmother, widow, Babinska, or he referred to her as, that she's 80 years old, she's widowed, and she said this has been the best thing to meet other men with. She got the cards and she said, they're just, they strike conversation. They like me, So, but she was terrified. She lived in fear of rejection to the point she had a smear. And then now she plays the game and she gets invitations now instead of rejections. It sounds bizarre. It sounds strange, but very often some of the most effective things are pretty simple and they work. He says this, just get out there and get rejected. And sometimes it's going to get dirty. But that's okay, because you're going to feel great after you're going to feel like, wow, I disobeyed fear. Have you ever played Monopoly or Sorry or Aggravation or board game and see how the winner always acts? I beat you. Okay. The object of the game is to win, right? If the object of the game is to be rejected and you win every day, how do you think you'll eventually start feeling? I'm a winner. Do you get a little winner happy dance, whatever you got going on? It's just changing your way of thinking about things. Now, hang with me, okay? What if Christ is asking us to do the same thing about sharing the gospel? Ray prayed in his prayer this morning, Elder's prayer this morning. Help us to be more bold. Help us to share the gospel. Help us not be afraid. But what if Jesus is asking us to do the same thing about sharing the gospel? You see, we only equate success with sharing the gospel with someone saying yes. But what if that's not what it's about? What if the act of sharing is twofold? What if it's twofold? Not just onefold, not just having someone say yes to Jesus, but what if it's twofold? What if it's having someone say yes to Jesus, but also changing yourself? We say we want to be more Christ-like, but how many of us want to do the rejection that Christ experienced? We want to be perfected in the image of Christ, but how many of us want to go through the perfecting process to know what rejection is? We even talked in class this morning in Hebrews chapter 5 we read, where how Jesus asked God to deliver him, to let the cup pass from him, as referred to in the gospel. And how he poured out his heart to God in tears and vehement cries, the Hebrew writer says, to let him not experience death. But God said no. That God's rejection of him was the ultimate perfecting process in his life. That God said no. You see, what if this putting oneself out enough to be rejected is the whole story? What if that's part of becoming Christ-like, in that I'm willing to put myself out, regardless if they're willing to receive it, regardless if they receive it. But what if just putting myself out to say, hey, would you mind sitting down and talking about Jesus for a minute with me? Or could you have a moment to talk about your relationship with God? Or writing a note to someone, hey, you're on my thoughts and my prayers, can we have a cup of coffee? Can we go to church together sometime? Would you go to Bible study with me? Could you join me for prayer? What if that's what it's about? I mean, perhaps being rejected is in itself transforming. I mean, that's what Jason discovered. That somehow when he got over his fear of rejection, instead of rejection being a failure, rejection was success, he suddenly transformed himself. He says, now, I've got a good life. We overcome ourselves and become more like Christ when we experience this. When you think about the commission to go, it doesn't really talk about outcomes. It talks about when they decide to follow Jesus, you make disciples of them and you baptize them. Jesus even sent his disciples out in a limited commission in 35 pairs, 70 of them. It says, go into the village and share the message. But if they don't, guess what? Go ahead and I got a solution for that. Shake your dust off your sandals and don't go back. He set them up for rejection. Paul says, Romans chapter 1, 16 through 17, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's a power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jews first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Paul says that the gospel is the power of God to who? Everyone. So who's everyone? Everyone. You, me, everybody. It is the power of God for salvation. But let me ask you this. Is it not also the power of God for transformation? To transform us, Paul will eventually say, into the image of His Son, day by day. So it's not just redemptive, it's transforming, right? So it is a power both to save and to change. So if I'm giving this great treasure, the pearl of great price, or however you want to express it in any of the metaphors that Jesus uses, and I don't do anything with it, and yet I'm unhappy because I'm not transformed, I'm not changed, God says, listen, just go be rejected. Just get rejected. In putting this together, this lesson spoke a lot to me in a lot of different areas of my life. Had tenure voted at the university, and they voted, my faculty colleagues voted yes for tenure, so I don't know, but that's going up the ranks like that. But with the understanding that I can't get promotion in a couple of years unless I do this thing called publish. You know, and they'll sort of axiom is publish or perish in academia. You got to get yourself published. In other words, you got to sit down and write things, submit it to journals, and hopefully someone will say yes. Okay. Guess one of the reasons I've not submitted anything. They send you these letters called rejection letters. And I just thought that would be the worst thing in the world if someone said, you're not good enough. And guess what that sort of challenged me to do? Is reframe this thing. I need a rejection letter. I need one fast. Because what does it mean? That I fail? No, I succeeded in putting myself out there. How many times do we just assume rejection's out there, and so by us doing it, we do nothing? I'm immobilized because I'm afraid of rejection. I do nothing because I'm afraid of rejection. Better to have done something, said no, it wasn't good enough, than done nothing at all, right? So some of you guys got a sweet on a girl, go up there and ask her out, And don't be devastated if she says no. Think, well, that's just one who just lost out. We can find another one. Right? But the gospel is the same thing. It's the power of God to both save and to change, right? But one of the changing processes is putting yourself out there in order to be rejected to sort of know what Jesus went through. Who was rejected by His brothers, by mankind, because they just couldn't comprehend it. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 5. Coming to Him as to a living stone, that is Jesus, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, what does that also mean? That you're going to be chosen and precious, and what else? Rejected. And you also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifice acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now, we can go a whole lot of this royal priesthood stuff, because you want to find some good identity, you find identity in that. That God has called you to be priests and priestesses in this world. Wow. It's awesome. But part and parcel of this experience is what? Rejection. Rejection is my goal and not my enemy. Rejection tells me I'm moving forward and not going backwards. Rejection says I'm not immobilized by my fear anymore. I'm actually putting myself out there. And does it feel good? Yeah, but listen, if I reframe rejection, instead of being I'm failing the game, I'm actually winning the game. If my goal is to be rejected and you reject me, thank you very much. I fulfilled my goal today. Is this what it means to be Christ-like? Is this what it means to find my identity in Him? Hebrew writer says, though He were a son, yet He learned obedience by the things which He suffered. Paul said in Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, that I may know Him and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His suffering, being conformed to His death. I think it's real easy sometimes to believe the gospel is, death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ, and obeying the gospel is living the Christian life. And living the Christian life is simply a moral code by which you do. I like the WWJD stuff, don't get me wrong. What would Jesus do? I think that's great. I think this is very helpful. But I think that's elementary in some respects. What if being a Christian is not just a moral code of being like Jesus and doing good to other people and being thoughtful and considerate and compassionate and all that? But what if the power of the gospel is to join in the fellowship of His suffering? What if it means putting myself out there to be rejected as He was rejected? What if it means it doesn't matter what you're going to say? Jesus is Lord. Doesn't matter what you think about it. I'm in church on Sunday. I'm in church on Wednesday. Don't care. Would you like to join me? Reject me and I'm still a winner. What if that is the transforming aspect of it? Maybe it's not a moral code. God did that once. He gave us 10 Commandments, a moral code to live by, right? How'd they do with that? Not so well. Only Jesus did it perfectly. But what if part of the parcel is to put yourself in His place? That is, to put yourself up for rejection. Is that a sign of spiritual maturity? I believe so. Is that something we need to be convicted about? Perhaps. I know if a man can overcome his fear of dating women by putting himself out for rejection and becoming a winner by being rejected, what if a Christian did the same? What would the kingdom look like? So when was the last time you were rejected? I ask myself that question. I avoid that as much as I can. I don't like that. But I want to be more like Jesus. But I'd rather do that moral code stuff. Just, do this, be nice and friendly and, give people your lunch if you need to. But what if the transforming aspect is more than that? What if it is putting yourself out? To begin saying, well, at least I tried. I'm a winner because they said no. And so this weird silence that I always give people when I think about, I'll share the gospel with them. No, they probably say no, so I won't. Or it'll embarrass me. Or they'll ask me some hard question. Like who wrote Hebrews they'll want to talk about Revelation and I don't understand that stuff. And so we just give eerie silence. To be Christ-like may mean to be Christ-like in that we are willing to experience the rejection of the world in order to be well-pleasing to the Father. Even his own brothers did not believe. Wow. The good news is the gospel. And the good news is the gospel. You know who's rejected by the gospel? No one. The gospel rejects no one. No one. No sinner. No one. If you're willing to confess Jesus as your Savior, be buried with Him in baptism, that's all that's required. Old, young, pretty, ugly, fat, skinny, gimpy, dowdy, grouchy, or sweet dispositioned. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. It rejects no one. Pretty powerful stuff. But yet, most reject it. Isn't that the irony? So you're here this morning and you're inclined to respond. Everything's ready. It's a beautiful day. We have all afternoon that we need to spend with you. But if you accept the invitation, won't you come as we stand and sing the song?